The instructor looked me dead in the eye and said, "Women don't belong here." His voice was cold, final, like he was stating a law of nature instead of an opinion. 3 months later, I made him eat those words in front of the entire base, and I'm not going to lie. It felt better than anything I'd ever accomplished in my life. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. My name is Tegan Reyes, and before all of this happened, I was just a 24-year-old from San Diego trying to figure out what I was supposed to do with my life. I'd been a college athlete, ran track, pushed my body to limits most people never touch, but something always felt missing. Like I was training for a race I hadn't found yet. Then my father died and everything changed. The man who told me I didn't belong was Lieutenant Commander Derek Holloway. 38 years old, 15 years as a Navy SEAL, and a reputation that preceded him like a storm cloud. Everyone on base knew his name. He was the guy who'd trained over 300 SEALs, the guy who held records nobody could touch, the guy who made grown men quit with just his words. He had this way of looking at you that made you feel like he could see every weakness, every doubt, every reason you weren't good enough. And when he looked at me that first day at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, I saw nothing but contempt. I wasn't alone in this fight, though. My older brother Miles, 29, a staff sergeant in the Army Rangers, had been stationed nearby, and he'd become my secret weapon. Miles and I grew up competing over everything, stupid stuff like who could hold a plank longer or who could finish dinner faster. But when I told him I wanted to try for the SEAL program, something shifted. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time and said, "If you're serious, I'll help you. But you need to understand what you're walking into. They're going to try to destroy you." I was serious, more serious than I'd ever been about anything. Standing at the entrance of that base on my first day, my stomach was doing backflips. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, could feel the weight of every person who said this was impossible pressing down on my shoulders. The Pacific Ocean crashed against the shore behind me, and for a second I thought about my father, about the journal entry I'd found after he died, about the words he never got to say to my face. I thought about Miles telling me I had what it took. I thought about every person who assumed I'd quit before I even started. Then I walked through those gates, and my life changed forever. Growing up in the Reyes household meant living and breathing military discipline. My father, Colonel Adrian Reyes, ran our home like a base. Bedtimes were non-negotiable. Chores had inspection standards. Weakness wasn't tolerated, and complaining got you absolutely nowhere. Miles thrived in that environment. He was the golden child. The son who could do 100 push-ups before breakfast, who talked tactics with Dad over dinner, who enlisted the day after high school graduation. I loved my brother, but watching Dad's face light up every time. Miles accomplished something military-related, while barely acknowledging my track medals stung more than I ever admitted out loud. Dad never said I couldn't join the military. He just made it clear he thought I shouldn't. When I mentioned it at 17, he put down his coffee and said, "Tegan, you're smart and you're tough, but combat isn't track and field. Focus on something more practical. Teaching maybe, or physical therapy. Something where your skills actually make sense." I didn't bring it up again. I went to college, ran competitive track, got my degree in kinesiology, and tried to convince myself he was right. But that feeling of being dismissed, of being seen as less capable simply because I was his daughter and not his son, never quite went away. Then 2 years ago, Dad had a massive heart attack in his office at Camp Pendleton, gone before the ambulance arrived. He was 56 years old, and suddenly all those conversations we never had, all those things left unsaid, became permanent. The funeral was massive, full of Marines and Army personnel and Navy officers who told stories about what a great leader he was, how he pushed people to be their best, how he never accepted anything less than excellence. I stood there thinking about how he pushed Miles to be excellent but told me to be practical. 3 months after the funeral, Mom asked me to go through Dad's personal effects, the boxes the military had sent home from his office. I found his journal tucked under a stack of field manuals. I almost didn't open it. Part of me didn't want to know what he really thought. Didn't want confirmation that I'd been right about always being second place. But I opened it anyway. Most entries were boring, work stuff, notes about training protocols and personnel issues. Then I found the entry from 3 years ago, right after one of my college track meets. Dad had driven 2 hours to watch me compete in the 1,500 meters. I'd fallen during the second lap, got spiked by another runner, but got back up and finished fourth. I remembered him leaving right after without saying much. His journal entry from that night read, "Watched Tegan compete today. She fell twice but got up with fire in her eyes. She has something Miles never had. He's strong and disciplined, but when things go wrong, he gets frustrated. Tegan turns pain into fuel. She doesn't quit, she recalibrates. If she ever wanted to serve, she'd outwork everyone in her unit. I should tell her that. I should tell her she's capable of anything she sets her mind to. Tomorrow I'll tell her." He never did. 6 weeks later, there's another entry. "Still haven't talked to Tegan about her potential. I think I'm afraid. Miles came home with a minor injury last month, and Valencia didn't sleep for 3 days. If Tegan enlisted, especially in combat arms, I don't think her mother could handle it. I don't know if I could handle it. Easier to discourage her than face that fear? I read those entries maybe 50 times. My father hadn't doubted my ability. He doubted his own courage to support me. That realization cracked something open inside me. I started researching that same night. The Navy had just expanded their experimental integration program, allowing women to attempt SEAL qualification training for the first time. The statistics were brutal. SEAL training had a 76% attrition rate for male candidates who were specifically recruited and prepared. No woman had ever completed the full program. Out of 200 female applicants in this new cycle, they were accepting only 12. The odds were astronomical, but I didn't care about odds anymore. I cared about finding out what I was actually capable of when nobody was telling me to aim lower. I spent the next 18 months preparing. I restructured my entire life around training. Up at 4:30 a.m. for running. Strength training at lunch. Swimming after work. I studied Hell Week survivor accounts like they were scripture. I watched documentary footage until I could recite the obstacles in my sleep. When Miles came home on leave, he put me through ranger workouts that left me vomiting in the bushes. He never went easy on me, never coddled me, and I loved him for it. Mom didn't understand. Valencia Reyes had already lost her husband to the military, and now her daughter wanted to volunteer for the most dangerous training in the armed forces. We fought about it constantly. She'd call me reckless, selfish, foolish. She'd cry and ask why a normal career wasn't enough. The night before I left for Coronado, she called me at 11 p.m., sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "Please don't do this, mija. I can't lose you too." "Mom, you're not losing me. I'm finding myself." "Your father wouldn't want this." "Yes, he would. He wrote it in his journal. He was just too scared to say it out loud." She hung up. I didn't sleep that night. Miles drove me to the base. The sun was just starting to rise over the Pacific, painting everything gold and purple. He parked outside the gates, turned to me, and gripped my shoulder hard. "Listen to me. You've done the physical work. Your body is ready. But Tegan, they're going to come after your mind first. They're going to find every insecurity, every doubt, every fear, and they're going to weaponize it. Especially with you being a woman. They want you to quit before you even prove what you can do." "I know. No, I don't think you do. It's going to be personal. It's going to be cruel. And you can't let it in." I nodded, grabbed my bag, and stepped out of the truck. Walking through those gates felt like stepping off a cliff. My heart hammered against my ribs. My hands were shaking. But I kept moving forward because turning around wasn't an option anymore. The first formation was immediate. Lieutenant Commander Holloway stood on a platform, scanning the crowd of candidates with the intensity of a predator selecting prey. When his eyes landed on the 12 women standing in formation, his expression didn't change, but something cold flickered across his face. He stepped down, walked directly to our group, and studied each of us like we were specimens under glass. Then he addressed the entire formation, but his eyes never left us. I've trained over 300 SEALs in my career. Not one of them was female. There's a reason for that, and it's not political. It's biological. It's statistical. It's reality. He paused, letting his words sink in. Some of you will quit today. Most of you will quit this week. The rest of you will realize that nature doesn't care about your feelings or your politics or your dreams. Nature built men for war, and no amount of wanting it to be different will change that fact. His finger pointed directly at me. You especially. I can see it in your eyes. You think you're here to prove something. You're not. You're here to learn a lesson about your limitations. The sooner you accept that, the less painful this will be. Every instinct screamed at me to respond, to defend myself, to prove him wrong right there. But Miles's voice echoed in my head. "Don't let it in!" I locked eyes with Holloway, kept my face blank, and said nothing. He smiled like he'd already won. "Welcome to Coronado. Let's see how long you last." The first week was designed to break us, and Holloway made sure I understood that the rules were different for me. During our first 4-mile timed run, I pushed myself hard, finishing in just under 30 minutes. It wasn't the fastest time, but it was respectable, middle of the pack. I crossed the finish line breathing hard, but feeling like maybe, just maybe, I could do this. Then Holloway pulled up beside me in a Jeep, megaphone in hand, his voice booming across the beach. "Reyes, your daddy was a Marine colonel, right? What do you think he'd say watching you lumber through that run like you're on a Sunday jog? You think he'd be proud? Or do you think he'd be embarrassed that his daughter is out here disgracing his memory?" My lungs were burning, my legs were shaking, but the words hit harder than any physical pain. I wanted to scream at him that my father had believed in me, that I had proof in his own handwriting, but I couldn't waste breath on arguments. I just nodded and kept moving toward the next evolution. It only got worse. During log PT, where teams of 6 carried 200-pound telephone poles through various exercises, Holloway assigned me to an all-male team. The other guys were massive, former college football players and wrestlers who outweighed me by 70 to 90 pounds. Before we started, Holloway pulled the team aside. I couldn't hear exactly what he said, but I saw their faces change. When we lifted that log, I felt the weight distribution shift. They were carrying more than their share, deliberately not letting me bear the load I was supposed to. After the exercise, one of them, a guy named Chen, muttered an apology. "He told us not to help you. Said to let you fail on your own so you'd quit faster. We're not trying to be difficult, but if we don't follow his orders, we're out." I understood, but understanding didn't make it less frustrating. Holloway was isolating me, making sure I couldn't build the camaraderie that gets people through training. Every day, more women dropped out. By day 5, 8 of the original 12 were gone. The 4 of us who remained became targets for increasingly creative cruelty. Week 2 brought surf torture, and that's when Holloway went from being a harsh instructor to something darker. We sat in the Pacific Ocean, water temperature hovering at 52 degrees, waves crashing over our heads while our bodies went into survival mode. Hypothermia sets in fast at that temperature. Your muscles seize, your mind gets foggy, and every second feels like an hour. I was shaking so violently my teeth were chattering loud enough to hear over the waves. Holloway walked into the surf, crouched down in front of me, his face inches from mine. His voice dropped low, intimate, meant only for my ears. "I knew your father, Reyes. We served together on a joint operation in 2019. Good man, respected leader. He told me something interesting one night over drinks. Said his daughter was chasing pipe dreams, that she'd never cut it in the real military. Said you were too soft, too emotional, too desperate for approval. He asked me, if you ever applied to my program, to discourage you early so you wouldn't waste everyone's time." The cold water suddenly felt like nothing compared to the ice in my veins. "You're lying." His smile was cruel. "Am I? Or are you just realizing that you're doing all of this for a dead man who never actually believed in you? Think about that while you freeze." He walked away, and I sat there in that freezing water wondering if any of what he said was true. Dad had hidden his real feelings in a journal. What if those supportive entries were outliers? What if most of his thoughts about me were doubt and disappointment? The cold seeped into my bones, but the doubt he'd planted seeped deeper. That night, after training secured, I called Miles from a payphone outside the barracks. My voice cracked the second he answered. He said Dad told him I couldn't do this. That Dad asked him to push me out. Miles, what if he's right? What if I'm just lying to myself about what Dad wanted? What if I'm wasting everyone's time trying to prove something to a ghost? Miles was quiet for a long moment, and that silence terrified me more than anything Holloway had said. Then he spoke, his voice steady and sure. "Tegan, listen to me. Did you read all of Dad's journal? Every page?" "Most of it. Why?" "There's an entry from 3 months before he died. Page 247. Read it tonight. Then call me back if you still have doubts." I found the journal in my locker, hands still shaking from the cold and the conversation. Page 247 was dated April 15th, just months before Dad's heart attack. The entry read, "Watched Tegan's track meet today. She fell during the 800 meters but got back up with fire in her eyes I've never seen in miles. My son is strong and disciplined, but Tegan has something different. She turns pain into fuel. She doesn't just endure, she transforms. If she ever wanted to serve, she'd outwork every single person in her unit. I should tell her this. Tomorrow I'll tell her. She needs to know she's capable of anything." I read it 5 times, tears streaming down my face. Holloway had lied. He'd weaponized my grief, my insecurity, my desperate need to honor my father's memory. And I'd almost let it work. But week 3 brought a new level of psychological warfare. Holloway announced during morning formation that the obstacle course qualifier would have special stakes. Anyone who finishes in the bottom 3 rankings gets recycled back to day 1, or they can quit and go home. No shame in recognizing your limits. It was transparently designed to target me. I'd been hovering around 4th or 5th place in most physical evolutions. Holloway paired competitors strategically, putting me up against candidate Jensen, a 6'3" former linebacker who outweighed me by 90 pounds and had been consistently finishing in the top 3. The message was clear. Beat the impossible or go home. The course was brutal. Rope climbs, wall scaling, underwater obstacle navigation, a final sprint carrying sandbags. Jensen was a machine, powerful and fast. But I'd spent 18 months preparing for exactly this. I used technique where he used strength, found efficiency where he used power. When we crossed the finish line, my lungs were screaming and my arms were numb. I finished 6th. Safe. Not great, but safe. I thought maybe I'd earned a moment of peace. I was wrong. During the evening debrief, Holloway stood in front of the entire remaining class and pointed at me. "Reyes here thinks she's proving something. She thinks because she finished 6th today, she's earned respect. But let me explain something to all of you about real combat. Every second she's slower is a second someone else has to compensate for her weakness. Every pound she can't carry is weight her teammate has to shoulder. In the field, her limitations don't just affect her. They get people killed. She's not a teammate. She's a liability playing dress-up in a program built for warriors." The room went silent. Then something unexpected happened. 3 male candidates stood up. One of them, a former Marine named Rodriguez, looked Holloway straight in the eye. "Sir, with all due respect, Reyes has outperformed half the men in this class. She's never quit, never complained, never asked for special treatment. If she's a liability, what does that make the guys she's beating?" Holloway's face went red. "You 3 are dismissed from the program. Effective immediately. Insubordination." They walked out, and the room erupted in whispered chaos. Holloway restored order with a single shout, but the damage was done. I wasn't just fighting him anymore. I was the reason good men were losing their chance. That night, alone in my rack, I realized the truth. Holloway wasn't trying to break me physically. He'd already accepted I could handle the physical punishment. He was trying to make me quit by making me believe I was hurting everyone around me. He wanted me to leave not because I failed, but because I felt guilty for succeeding, and I almost let him win. That night changed everything. I lay in my rack, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of waves crashing outside, and forced myself to face a hard truth. I couldn't outlift these men. I couldn't outrun them on pure speed. I couldn't match them pound for pound in raw physical strength, and pretending otherwise was just setting myself up for failure. But strength wasn't the only thing that mattered in this program. Holloway had taught me that himself, even if he didn't realize it. He'd been trying to break me mentally for weeks because he understood that the mind quits before the body does. If mental toughness mattered enough for him to weaponize it against me, then maybe that was where I could win. I stopped trying to prove I was as strong as the men. Instead, I decided to prove I was tougher than all of them, including Holloway himself. The next morning, I called Miles during our brief personal time. "I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I need help. Not with training. I need to understand how to beat Holloway at his own game." Miles was quiet for a second. "You want to go after him directly?" He's made this personal. 3 guys got kicked out because they defended me. He's not going to stop until I quit, or until someone makes him stop. "I'm done playing defense. Hold on." The phone went silent, and I could hear muffled voices in the background. When Miles came back, his tone had changed. "I'm connecting you with someone. Sergeant Nina Ortega. She's an Army Ranger, went through their integration program 2 years ago, faced similar garbage. She'll call you in 10 minutes, Nina called exactly 10 minutes later. Her voice was direct, no nonsense, and carried the weight of someone who'd fought this battle before. Miles told me about Holloway. I know the type. They don't respect equality, Reyes. They don't care about fairness or opportunity or any of that. They respect dominance. You need to beat him at something he thinks he owns completely. Something public. Something undeniable. Like what? What's his reputation built on? Every instructor has their thing, the accomplishment they use to justify their authority. I thought about it. Holloway referenced his combat deployments, his training record, but the thing he talked about most, the thing he did monthly in front of everyone, was the SEAL Fit Murph Challenge. It was a workout designed by a fallen SEAL, a brutal test that combined running, pull-ups, push-ups, and squats while wearing a weighted vest. Holloway held the base record at 47 minutes and 23 seconds. He'd held it for 6 years, and every month he'd run it again, always finishing first, always making sure everyone knew he was untouchable. The Murph Challenge, I said. He owns that record. Nina laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. Then take it from him. But Reyes, listen to me. Don't challenge him unless you're absolutely certain you can win. If you lose, you're done. Not just in his eyes, but in yours. This kind of move only works once. How do I make sure I win? You study him like he's an enemy combatant. Watch his technique, find his weaknesses, train in secret. And you prepare like your life depends on it because your career does. I spent the next 2 weeks training in secret. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., 2 hours before mandatory PT, and run the Murph course on a neighboring base where nobody would see me. The first attempt was humiliating. I finished in 72 minutes, gasping and broken. My pull-ups were weak. My pacing was terrible. And the weighted vest felt like it was crushing my spine. But I went back the next night and the night after that. I watched old footage of Holloway running the course, studied his split times, analyzed his pacing strategy. He had a fatal flaw. He sprinted the first mile to establish dominance, which meant he hit the pull-ups already fatigued. His explosive start cost him endurance in the middle sections. I built my strategy around patience. Moderate pace on the first run to preserve energy. Controlled, steady reps on the pull-ups to save my grip strength. Push through the push-ups and squats with mechanical efficiency, then empty the tank on the final mile when everyone else was broken. Miles snuck onto base twice to train with me. He was brutal, screaming in my face when my form got sloppy, refusing to let me quit even when my muscles were screaming. During one session, I collapsed after my 80th pull-up, my hands bleeding through my gloves. I can't do this, Miles. His record is almost 47 minutes. I'm barely breaking 60. He crouched down next to me, his face inches from mine. You're not trying to beat a time, Tegan. You're trying to beat an ego. And egos are fragile. They crack under pressure. His advantage is physical strength. Yours is that you've spent your entire life being underestimated. You know how to be uncomfortable. You know how to hurt and keep moving. He doesn't think you're a threat, which means he won't train for this like you will. That's your edge. By the end of the second week, I'd cut my time to 49 minutes. Close, but not enough. I changed my pull-up grip technique, switched to kipping pull-ups to save energy. I practiced the transition between exercises until they were seamless, no wasted seconds. 3 days before I planned to issue the challenge, I ran the course one final time. The clock read 46 minutes and 41 seconds, 18 seconds faster than Holloway's record. I was ready. The next day, Holloway announced the monthly Murph Challenge during evening formation. Candidates could volunteer to participate. It was always framed as optional, but everyone knew it was really a test of who had the guts to try. I waited until he finished his announcement, then stepped forward in front of the entire formation. Lieutenant Commander Holloway, I'd like to formally challenge your base record. The formation went dead silent. Holloway's expression shifted from surprise to amusement. He actually smiled. You can't even do 10 dead hang pull-ups, Reyes. The Murph requires 100. Then you have nothing to worry about, sir. His smile faded. The challenge was public now, witnessed by 80 candidates and a dozen instructors. Backing down would make him look weak. Accepting meant risking his reputation against someone he'd publicly called a liability. Fine. You want to embarrass yourself in front of the entire base, be my guest. But let's make it interesting. When you fail, and you will fail, you quit the program. No excuses, no second chances. You're done. Every instinct told me to negotiate, to add conditions, to protect myself. But I knew how this had to play. I had to match his confidence with my own, had to show everyone I believed I could win. And when I beat your time, you apologize to every woman you've dismissed from this program. You admit, in front of everyone, that you were wrong about us. The formation erupted in whispers. Instructors exchanged glances. Holloway's jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought he'd refuse. Then he stepped forward and extended his hand. Deal. We shook, and the second our hands gripped, I knew there was no going back. I just bet my entire future on one workout. Word spread across the base within hours. By that evening, people I'd never met were stopping me to ask if I was serious. Some looked concerned. Others looked excited. A few looked at me like I'd just signed my own death warrant. Miles called that night. You really did it. No turning back now. I know. Tegan, listen to me. You've got the physical ability. I've seen your times. But on the day, with everyone watching, with your career on the line, your mind is going to try to quit. That's when champions are made. When your body is screaming to stop, when the pain feels unbearable, you have to find something deeper. What's your reason for finishing? I thought about Dad's journal entries, about the words he never got to say. I thought about every person who'd told me to aim lower, to be realistic, to accept my limitations. I thought about Rodriguez and the other two guys who'd been kicked out for defending me. I'm finishing because I need to know who I really am when everything is on the line. Not who people think I am, who I actually am. Then you'll finish, and you'll win. 3 days later, the entire base turned out to watch. Over 300 personnel lined the course. This wasn't just about me and Holloway anymore. This was about whether women belonged in special operations. This was about every limiting belief people had about what bodies like mine could accomplish. The weight of it all should have crushed me, but instead, it felt like fuel. I saw Miles standing at the finish line. Mom had flown in from San Diego, standing in the crowd with tears already streaming down her face. And Holloway stood at the starting line, stripping down to his PT gear, looking at me like I was already beaten. He leaned close and said, "Last chance to walk away with some dignity. Reyes." I stepped up to the line, looked him dead in the eye, and said the only thing that mattered, start the clock. The starting horn blared and Holloway exploded off the line like he'd been shot from a cannon. This was his signature move, the intimidation tactic that had broken countless competitors before they even reached the pull-up bar. He wanted everyone to watch him disappear into the distance, wanted me to panic and chase him, wanted me to burn out my legs trying to keep pace with someone who outweighed me by 70 pounds of muscle. I didn't take the bait. I held my pace at exactly 7 minutes and 30 seconds per mile, the pace I'd practiced dozens of times in the dark at 3 in the morning. My breathing was controlled, my stride was efficient, and I refused to look at Holloway's back getting smaller ahead of me. The crowd was roaring, but I blocked it out. This wasn't about them. This was about executing the plan. Holloway finished the first mile in 6 minutes and 45 seconds. I crossed the line 18 seconds later. The crowd's energy shifted. I could feel their doubt, hear the whispers that I was already too far behind. Even Miles looked worried. But I knew something they didn't. Holloway had just made his first mistake. The pull-up bar was waiting, and this was where everything would be decided. Holloway attacked it with aggressive, fast reps, his massive arms yanking his body up with raw power. 25 pull-ups in the first 90 seconds. The crowd went wild. He was showing off now, proving his dominance. But I watched his form carefully. At rep 40, his kipping motion got sloppier. At rep 60, he had to pause for 3 seconds between reps. His grip was failing. All that explosive power in the first mile was catching up to him. I started my pull-ups with controlled, methodical precision. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was trying to survive the next 90 minutes. Kipping pull-ups, using momentum efficiently, saving my grip strength for the long haul. My shoulders burned and my hands were already raw, but I maintained rhythm. 1 rep, breathe, next rep, breathe. Don't think about the total. Just focus on the next one. Holloway finished his 100 pull-ups at the 8-minute mark, stumbling away from the bar with his arms visibly shaking. I finished at 9 minutes and 12 seconds. I'd closed the gap. Now I was only 1 minute and 12 seconds behind, and the crowd had noticed. The energy changed. People started cheering my name. The push-ups were next, 200 of them, and this was where my smaller frame became an advantage. Less body weight meant less resistance. I dropped into perfect form and started counting. Holloway was 10 feet away, grinding through his reps, but his pace was noticeably slower. His arms were trashed from those aggressive pull-ups. Every rep looked painful. I could hear him grunting, struggling. I focused on form over speed. Chest to ground, full extension, controlled movement. At rep 100, my arms felt like they were going to fall off. At rep 150, I wanted to quit more than I'd ever wanted anything. But I thought about Rodriguez getting kicked out for defending me. I thought about Dad's journal entry. I thought about every morning I'd woken up at 3 a.m. in the freezing cold to train for this exact moment. When I finished my 200th push-up, I looked over. Holloway was still at 183, his form completely broken, basically just moving his body up and down without proper extension. The crowd was screaming now. We moved to the squats, 300 reps with a weighted vest that felt like it was compressing my spine. This was the grind, the part where mental toughness mattered more than physical strength. Holloway's legs were shaking. Mine were too, but I'd trained for this specific feeling, had pushed through it so many times that my body knew how to function in this state of exhaustion. At rep 200, we were side by side. The crowd was absolutely losing their minds. At rep 250, I pulled ahead by 5 reps. Holloway looked over at me and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Panic. He was realizing he might actually lose. We finished the squats within seconds of each other and staggered to the starting line for the final mile. This was it. Everything came down to the next 7 or 8 minutes. My legs felt like concrete. My lungs were on fire and every muscle in my body was screaming for me to stop. But I looked at the finish line and saw Miles jumping up and down, screaming my name. I saw my mother with her hands over her mouth, crying. I saw 300 people who'd come to watch me fail, and I decided right then that they were going to watch me win instead. Holloway and I started the final mile together, stride for stride. For the first quarter mile, we matched pace. Then I heard his breathing change. It became ragged, desperate, the sound of someone whose body was shutting down. He'd sprinted that first mile, destroyed his arms on the pull-ups, and now he had nothing left in the tank. I surged ahead. 10 feet, then 20, then 30. Behind me, I could hear Holloway trying to respond, his footsteps pounding harder, faster, but it was panic running, not strategy. He was burning his last reserves. I maintained my pace, steady and relentless, the same pace I'd practiced over and over in the dark when nobody was watching. At the half-mile mark, I was 40 feet ahead. Holloway was staggering, his form completely broken. The crowd was absolutely deafening. I could hear individual voices now. "Come on, Tegan. You've got this! Finish it!" My vision was tunneling, my body was running on pure willpower, but the finish line was getting closer. With 200 meters left, my legs almost gave out. I stumbled, nearly went down, but caught myself. Behind me, Holloway saw it and found some desperate reserve of energy. He was sprinting now, actually sprinting, closing the gap. 50 feet, 40 feet, 30 feet. The crowd was screaming warnings. "He's coming! Move! Go!" I didn't look back. I just ran, faster than my body wanted to move, faster than should have been possible after everything I'd just done. The finish line was right there, 20 meters, 10 meters, 5 meters. I could hear Holloway's footsteps right behind me, could feel him closing in. I crossed the finish line and collapsed. The clock read 46 minutes and 58 seconds, 25 seconds faster than Holloway's 6-year record. 17 seconds later, Holloway crossed the line, stumbled 3 steps forward, bent over, and threw up on the pavement. The base erupted in chaos. Miles grabbed me off the ground, lifted me into the air, spinning me around while I gasped for breath. My mother was sobbing, pushing through the crowd to reach me. People were chanting my name, but I couldn't focus on any of it. I was staring at Holloway, bent over, hands on his knees, defeated in front of the entire base. The base commander stepped forward, his hand extended toward me. "Hell of a performance, Candidate Reyes, one for the history books." Every eye turned to Holloway. The crowd fell silent. This was the moment that mattered more than the time, more than the record. This was about accountability. He straightened slowly, his face red, sweat pouring down his neck. He walked toward me, and for a second, I genuinely thought he might refuse to honor our agreement. He stopped 3 feet away. His jaw was clenched, his eyes hard, but then something shifted. The hardness cracked, and what I saw underneath surprised me. It wasn't anger. It was shame. When he spoke, his voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "I was wrong!" the crowd gasped. Someone dropped something that clattered on the pavement. Holloway continued. "I let my ego and my prejudice blind me to what was right in front of me. You didn't just beat me today, Reyes. You've been exceeding my expectations every single day since you arrived. And I was too stubborn and too afraid to admit it." He turned to face the crowd, addressing everyone. "To every woman I dismissed, every candidate I underestimated, every person I pushed out because they didn't fit my narrow definition of what a warrior looks like, I'm sorry. I failed you. I failed this program. And I failed the values I claim to uphold." He looked back at me, and this time his voice was quieter, more personal. "You belong here, Reyes. You belong anywhere you decide to be. And it took you beating me in front of everyone for me to see what should have been obvious from day one." He extended his hand. I looked at it for a long moment, thinking about every cruel word, every psychological game, every attempt to break me. Then I thought about what Miles had told me weeks ago. Champions aren't defined by how they win. They're defined by what they do after. I shook his hand. The base exploded in applause. The days after the Murph Challenge were surreal. I went from being the candidate everyone expected to quit to being the story everyone wanted to tell. People I'd never spoken to would stop me between training evolutions to shake my hand or tell me they'd been rooting for me the whole time. Some of them were lying, but I didn't care. The energy on base had shifted, and I could feel it in every formation, every run, every obstacle course. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. But the real test was still ahead. 3 weeks later, Hell Week arrived. 5.5 days of continuous training with a maximum total of 4 hours of sleep. It's the week that breaks most candidates, the week where your body shuts down and only your mind can carry you forward. Out of the 80 candidates who started, only 36 made it through. 4 of them were women. I was one of them. Holloway became a different instructor after our competition. He didn't go easy on me, didn't give me special treatment, or try to make up for the past with favoritism. Instead, he pushed me harder than almost anyone else, but the cruelty was gone. When I struggled with underwater knot tying during dive training, he stayed after hours to work with me one-on-one, explaining techniques until my frozen fingers could finally manage the complicated ties. When I fell behind during a 20-mile ruck march, he appeared beside me, matching my pace, and said quietly, "Your form is breaking down. Adjust your hip belt and shorten your stride. You've got this." The biggest change came during our final week of training. Holloway pulled me aside after evening formation and handed me a folder. Inside was a letter of recommendation for advanced tactical training, 3 pages long, typed and signed. I started reading and my throat immediately tightened. He'd written things like, "Demonstrates exceptional mental resilience, under sustained pressure, and exhibits leadership qualities that inspire team cohesion and represents the evolution of what it means to be a modern warrior." At the bottom, he'd handwritten a note. "I was wrong about you from day one, but you were never wrong about yourself. That's the difference between us." I looked up at him, not sure what to say. He just nodded once and walked away. Graduation came on a bright morning in late October. My mother sat in the front row wearing Dad's old Marine Corps pin on her jacket. Miles stood with the other military personnel in dress uniform. When the base commander called my name and placed the sealed trident in my hand, I heard my mother sob so loudly it echoed across the entire ceremony. I looked down at that gold pin, the eagle clutching a trident, an anchor, and pistol, and thought about how far I'd come from that first day when Holloway told me I didn't belong. After the ceremony, I drove to the National Cemetery where Dad was buried. It was a 2-hour drive, and I spent most of it replaying moments from training, thinking about all the times I'd wanted to quit and somehow didn't. I found his grave under an oak tree, the headstone simple and clean with his name, rank, and years of service. I knelt down in my dress uniform and placed my sealed trident on top of the stone. "You were wrong about me, Dad," I said out loud, not caring if anyone heard. "You thought I was too soft, too emotional, that I wouldn't be able to handle it. But here's the thing. You were also right. You wrote in your journal that I turn pain into fuel, that I don't quit, I recalibrate. You saw something in me that you were too scared to tell me about. So yeah, you were wrong to doubt me out loud. But you were right about who I actually was." I stayed there for 20 minutes. just sitting in the grass, feeling the sun on my face. Finally, I stood up, saluted his headstone the way he'd taught me when I was 7 years old, and walked back to my car. Miles was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his truck. He didn't say anything, just pulled me into a hug that lasted a long time. When he finally let go, he wiped his eyes quickly and said, "Dad would have lost his mind watching you beat Holloway. He would have bragged about it to everyone he knew for the rest of his life." "You think so?" "I know so. He was stubborn and scared and wrong about a lot of things. But he loved you. And somewhere, somehow, I think he knows what you did." The story didn't end there. Footage of my Murph Challenge performance went viral within military communities and eventually hit mainstream media. The Navy used clips in their recruitment campaigns, and suddenly I was doing interviews and appearing on podcasts talking about breaking barriers and pushing limits. It was uncomfortable and strange, being the face of something bigger than myself. But I used the platform to talk about the women who'd come before me, the ones who'd tried and failed not because they weren't good enough, but because the system was designed to reject them. Holloway changed, too. He started publicly advocating for gender integration in special operations, writing articles for military journals and testifying before congressional committees about the need for merit-based standards rather than gender-based assumptions. We never became close friends, but we developed a mutual respect built on the foundation of that one competition, where everything changed. 6 months after graduation, I received orders for my first deployment. The night before I left, I got a text from Holloway. It was short and simple. "Stay safe out there, Reyes. The teams are lucky to have you." I thought about everything I'd learned during those brutal months at Coronado. About how doubt is louder than encouragement. How pain is temporary but quitting lasts forever. How the people who tell you that you can't do something are often the ones most afraid of what happens if you prove them wrong. I learned that strength isn't just about how much weight you can lift or how fast you can run. It's about how you respond when someone tells you that you don't belong. When every logical reason says you should quit. When your body is broken and your mind is screaming for relief. I learned that the sweetest victories aren't the ones where everyone expects you to win. They're the ones where everyone expects you to fail. And you show up anyway, and you do the impossible. And you force the world to reconsider what it thought it knew about limits and potential, and who gets to be called a warrior. Holloway laughed at my dream that first day. He told me I didn't belong, that nature had decided my limitations before I ever walked through those gates. 3 months later, I made him eat those words in front of the entire base. But here's what I realized in the aftermath, sitting in that cemetery talking to my father's ghost. I didn't beat Holloway to change his mind. That was just a bonus. I beat him to prove to myself that when everything is on the line, when the odds are impossible and the cost of failure is everything you've worked for, I could still find a way to win. And that's a truth nobody can ever take away from me, no matter what challenges come next. The instructor said women don't belong in the SEALs. I didn't argue with him. I didn't try to convince him he was wrong. I just showed up every single day, did the work, and let my performance speak louder than his doubts. In the end, that was the only argument that mattered. Some people will always doubt you. Let them. Their doubts have nothing to do with your potential and everything to do with their own limitations. The question isn't whether you belong. The question is whether you're willing to prove it when nobody believes in you except yourself. I was willing, and that made all the difference.